Well, first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired. What's up, Holmes?
Beware your host, Jonathan Holmes.
Well, Merritt, I'm going to assume it's working.
Okay.
It's working. I love Conrad's annoyed voice. I'm sorry, Conrad. I shouldn't love it so much. So we had technical problems. The audio wasn't working, I'm told. So you might have missed the fact that Merritt Kopas is the guest on the show, and she was telling us about how she grew up playing video games and enjoyed them, but then she changed. And tell me if I'm getting any of this wrong, Merritt. I was listening hard. My brain doesn't always work. You seem to have changed, maybe more so than video games did. Fell off video games a little bit. Got a BA and an MA in social sciences, just a lot of work. College. Did you like college?
Yeah, I mean, like, especially grad school, like, I think those spaces can be really useful for some people, and, like, certainly it was for me, like, just providing a space to sort of, do some work that is relatively important, and they're relatively safe spaces for some people, I think, and definitely grad school was for me. So yeah, I think I liked it.
That's good to hear. I did grad school too, and I had never been more stressed out in my life. But that's for a variety of other reasons. And so then you get your MA, and you're out of college, and you're thinking, what am I going to do? How did that end up, or at least how did, in part, video games become part of what you are doing with your degree?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, and I guess the audio wasn't working, but so I sort of was becoming aware that people were using games to tell really personal stories, or to tell stories at least that diverged in some way from the kinds of things that games usually do. And I think she's probably going to be really upset at me for mentioning this, because I think she's kind of sick of talking about it. But I played Anna Anthropy's Dysphoria when it was released, and it was just like, wow, like a video game can do that. A video game can make me cry. That's amazing, and can speak to my experience. And I think it was around that point that I was like, I want to be doing this. And so I ended up picking up her book and like a few other people's books and just sort of following people on Twitter, and realizing like, yeah, like I really want to be creating things or expressing things in a mode that isn't just the sort of textual mode that academics prepare people to. And games seemed like a really cool way of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think Anna's games have changed a lot of people's ideas about what video games can be and what they can provide for people beyond just kind of power fantasy or whatnot. She does have some awesome power fantasies, but she also isn't afraid to go the opposite direction and just make games about powerlessness and vulnerability, which in the mainstream, it's so rare that anyone is aware that those things exist. And I'm really excited that Anna's been picked up by so many mainstream outlets and talked about. I just wish she were rich. She's not rich yet, which always worries me.
No.
One of these days, I hope.
Yeah,
it's possible. I just
yeah, if anyone deserves it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So what do you think it is for you? What do you think it is about games that are different than, let's say, if you just wanted to write about your experience or make film or whatnot? Well, what is it for you personally that makes video games work in a way that, for whatever reason, is fitting into your life right now?
Yeah, so I think there are a few reasons why games appeal to me. First of all, I think like the reason that a lot of people talk about is like interactivity, and you can put the player within the logic of some system and sort of force them to grapple with that system in a way that maybe a textual account doesn't let them do. And I think there's a risk of overstating the difference between games and other media, because I think reading a book is an interactive experience too. But certainly like being able to construct the system and hide some of the rules from players, so they're not really sure why things are happening the way they are, and they're sort of trying to piece that together. That's a really appealing thing to me. So that's the primary thing right now, is sort of creating these systems that people can try and navigate and try and determine the rules of without them being made explicit to them up front.
Interesting. What do you think it is about that whole concept that resonates with you? The idea of providing these hidden rules to the player that they can discover and kind of be elated when they discover them. In some of your games, when I discover the hidden mechanics, I'm all excited. And then other times, you've often, with your games, made me feel sadder than I thought I was going to suddenly, and in a way that felt real, which is always better than those sad feelings that you get when watching Lifetime movies that aren't particularly well made, but they just pull at those heartstrings. What do you think is about embedding those hidden rules in there that appeals to you?
Yeah, I think part of it is that I'm interested in telling stories about maybe not total powerlessness, but certainly about subjection and being immersed in these systems that structure people's lives. And when you're trying to tell an account of that kind of experience, there's always the risk that what people take away from it isn't, wow, there's the structure that is organizing our lives, but wow, this person in particular has a really tragic story, sort of like the Lifetime thing that you just mentioned, right? And when you can hide rules from people and when you can create this structure that they have to navigate, it sort of cuts off that interpretation, or at least that's my hope, this interpretation of it's just this one person's tragic life story, because that's usually not what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at, like, look, this is a thing that affects you. It affects me too. It affects everyone. And so I think that enables that in games, or I hope it does.
Huh. Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at all the things you've learned about how social structures work, do you see life as kind of like a game design that has been put forward to us? I certainly do. I see religion as kind of a game design. I see how to get a job as kind of a game design. I see how to, be a likable person on an internet video about video games. There's so many things that there are rules that people aren't taught, and if you figure them out, you're going to have a lot better time of it. That's how I see it anyway. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some value in that perspective of, yeah, thinking about people's lives as governed by rules and rules that most people aren't taught. And so that can sort of be an analogy for thinking about like power and privilege, right? So like there are some people who know the rules, like there is a system in place, and there are some people who know how to play that game. And if you have a group of people going into a game and some people know the rules and some people don't, like it's not going to be a surprise if the people who know them come out on top, right? So yeah, I think there's a risk in sort of going overboard and sort of seeing everything as kind of like a game to be won, or like a really behavioralist sort of like you have to maximize your chances of winning. But yeah, I think that's like a really great analogy and a great way of introducing people to talking about power.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Using games as a teaching tool like that, it's an idea that's time is hopefully coming. And you've done some talks recently. Didn't you do one at the University of Virginia about this sort of thing?
Yeah, it was actually University of Victoria.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
I failed.
But yeah, no, I've talked about a lot of this kind of stuff about like why I want to use games as a medium. It was kind of a really critical talk in that I was sort of trying to pull apart a lot of the common reasons that people talk about using games. But yeah, one of the things I did talk about was teaching, and especially like one thing I'm really interested in is teaching people to make games as a way of understanding systems. So not just playing games about things, but actually making things as a way of like understanding how something works. And I think that's like a really fruitful avenue for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed, I don't know if you've done this intentionally, but I feel like there are some of your games that feel very much focused on just how the system and the design of the game works, and there's others that still incorporate that, but are also very much poetry and feel like I'm getting to really enter your thoughts and feelings for a little while. So sometimes it almost feels like you're taking an academic approach to just how to design a game, and other times it's more just like making yourself so vulnerable. I can't believe what the? I'm so impressed that you are willing to put yourself out there in that way, in ways that make you so susceptible to emotional harm from people who may want to use that avenue to attack you. So, geez, couldn't be more impressed with that, honestly. But anyway, is that something you've consciously gone about? Is to take on some projects, just delve more into design, and others to kind of delve into yourself, or both?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think those are both some of my motivations in making games. Definitely with some of the things I've made, like the motivation has been like, yeah, like I want to learn something about me. Like I'm doing an investigation, but it's maybe not into something out there. It's like something going on in my psyche or like in my experience. Um, and I think a lot of those projects are definitely informed by poetry. Uh, One thing I've noticed is that, well, I'm not really the first person to notice this, but mainstream games have this fixation with blockbuster film as like the medium they're constantly comparing themselves to. And for me, a lot of the work that I compare myself to is poetry, especially with my Twine work. Like I'm really interested in creating kind of short, emotionally intense experiences rather than sort of these big cinematic ones.
And before we forget, or before I forget, you also have a website that's dedicated to showing people new video games called Forest Ambassador. It's shown me a lot of games that I've been really amazed with. I tend to think that I'm going to find out about every video game because I read video game news tips a day sent to Destructoid, and I talk to people who make video games, pretty much all day. But you've shown me a lot of games where I've never found out about. How do you end up finding those?
Yeah, well, I will say that like I'm uh, building off the work that a lot of other people are doing. So especially the folks at Free Indie Games, which is just like this tremendous resource. And sort of like one way that I see the work I'm doing with Forest Ambassador is uh, sort of picking through the sort of massive trawling nets that Free Indie Games brings up, and just sort of trying to find things that are going to make sense to people who don't have a lot of experience with games, because it's a huge range and just like a huge quantity. And so like I'm just trying to pick out a few things that I think might appeal to people who don't have that background.
Mm-hmm. So you're doing game creation, you're doing game curation, and you're doing speaking to people who may not. I don't know if that's not evangelism. What is it when you go out and maybe activism, going out to people who may not know that they have something they can do with video games, and showing them that it's a medium that can be for them too. So good that that's finally happening. Like you were saying about the blockbuster games and the AAA games chasing that for so many years. I've been waiting for a long, long time. It feels like for people to take video games back and make them about human stories and not about just chasing as much money as possible. It's been something that when I first got into games, I felt like that was often a part of it. They weren't as expensive to make then, so they didn't chase as much money back then. But that side of the industry has gotten so bloated and gross to look at. It's such a relief to see that the balance is swinging in the other direction in a lot of ways, and people such as yourself are finally getting more attention. I was sure I was going to end that in a question somehow, but I failed. What do you make of the scene that's budding up with you and many other people who seem to be making this conscious effort to make video games not so much about power fantasies to satiate the lowest common denominator, and are trying to make them about something that, not to sound pretentious, but would have more personal meaning and maybe more importance in general than just a blockbuster type thing?
Yeah, well, I think like it's first and foremost just a consequence of having more accessible tools and getting them to people. I think games as a medium have been extremely hard to access and to develop, like I mentioned before, and that's starting to change a little bit. And like I don't want to overstate the case for that, because it's still really hard to make a lot of genres of games. But what we're seeing is like things like Twine are getting into people's hands, and they're doing things that a big studio that, like you said, needs to recoup a lot of money can't necessarily do or isn't willing to do. Um, Teaching Twine workshops has been just really amazing to see like the range of people that are interested in using these tools. Like um, I was at the Allied Media Conference with Anna a few months ago, and we led a workshop where there was like a mom and like a 5 or 6 year old girl making a game. I was helping like this like 50-plus-year-old man make something. And so the things that they're going to be making are necessarily going to be different because they're not probably invested in the same kinds of structures that the industry traditionally has been.
Mhm. Absolutely. Do you feel a sense that things have changed just in terms of what people's expectations are out of mainstream video games as well, and that people aren't willing to put up with the same garbage in the same way that they used to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's shifting. I think to me, one of the indicators of that is just like the massive amounts of bile being spewed right now at anyone who is being really loud about those conditions. Because to me, that signifies that there's a threat they're perceiving. And so I think there are changes happening, and there are people who've been doing a lot of work in pushing around mainstream games. Um, and so, yeah, like I think some of that is moving as well, and some of the expectations are changing. Like, again, I don't want to necessarily overstate that because a lot of people, I think, are perfectly happy with the state of mainstream games, but uh, the number of people who are, I think, or at least hope, is dwindling.
I hope so. And it's been sad and exciting to watch Anita Sarkeesian in particular. We still get tips sent to us by people who are just so excited about trying to discredit her and attack her and get really angry at Destructoid for not writing these stories about how she's been revealed to have not played video games for 2 years straight or something. I can't remember the last one we got. It actually sounded like her story was somewhat similar to yours in that she played video games growing up, had kind of a schism from them when she became an adult and was like, these things aren't for me anymore, and has since tried to return to them to try to bring them back a little bit. But yeah, it's been daunting on my end of it anyway to see so many people who are trying to do what you're doing get attacked so openly and feeling kind of powerless on the sidelines, not much to do about it for them. Has that been an issue for you? Have you felt like since you've started putting games out on the internet and being pretty public, and I've watched your Twitter account increase actually since I first started following you. It's gone up by like 5,000 or something, which is exciting. Have you? But as you, well, it keeps going up. As that's happened, have you had to deal with more negative feedback from people, or are the people who would come out to attack you, are you lucky enough to have avoided them so far?
Yeah, that's been something I've thought about a lot because I surprisingly, it feels like don't get a lot of abuse online and don't get a lot of harassment, which I'm not complaining about. But I see other people being attacked, and it's kind of like, why isn't this happening to me? Like it should be by all accounts. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I don't really engage in a lot of the debates and like arguments around mainstream games, just usually because I'm not as invested in them. I really appreciate that people are doing that work, and I think it's important, but I usually don't have the context. Like I haven't played a lot of these games, so I can't really speak to them. Um, so I avoid those kinds of arguments, which is I think where people are really get really sort of the most defensive. And the other thing is like, here's like a secret tip how to win at Twitter. The block button is right there, and I basically am extremely aggressive with blocking people. So I don't really feel the need to engage with people who want to say, vicious things to me, because they're not really interested in having a conversation. So I don't think I should be either. So yeah, like that's basically just like I don't engage, is pretty much my strategy.
Yeah, that's it's mature and intelligent, which is something that I'm worst at on the internet. The internet, Twitter in particular, for some reason, it turns me into a 15-year-old sometimes, who's not very smart. So I'm glad you've been able to keep your head on it. So I want to make sure there's some things I'm scrolling through my brain, all the things to make sure we talk about. And one of them is that you're working on a new game, and I've only seen graphics of it, and I'm pretty excited about it. Are you willing to tell us about it at all?
Are you
Curious.
talking about Medusa Medusa?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, Medusa Medusa is a game that I've started working on almost a year ago, actually, and it's sort of been like off and on development. And I picked it up again recently and just put a lot of work into it, and I think it's getting close to being done. So I'm hoping it'll be released like by the end of November, fingers crossed, maybe. And basically, it's a game about being Medusa, and uh, it's sort of about navigating a space and sort of like managing your gaze and like what you're seeing. And uh, basically, the main mechanic is there are mirrors dotted throughout the environment, and you're trying to avoid looking at them. And if you see them, sort of, you freeze when you see your reflection. And so to avoid that, you can hold a button down to black out the entire screen except your character. And so it's sort of like you're closing your eyes. And that helps because you don't have to worry about mirrors, but suddenly you're navigating this experience or this environment, without being able to see. So it's kind of about yeah, it's about like recognition and about seeing yourself in ways that maybe don't match up with your self-image. Um, and it's about Medusa too, because I think Medusa is like this really cool, amazing mythological figure, and not aware of a lot of games or many that sort of put you in the role of a character like that.
Yeah, I can't think of any. I always wanted to play as Medusa in Castlevania. I always thought she was cooler, but never had a chance. That's such a wow. So you, I don't even know where to start with that. I'm so interested. What got you interested in Medusa in the first place? What is it about her? Because I've always been fascinated with that character as I remember,
Mm-hmm.
she was one of the older gods before the Greek gods, which were very oftentimes about the rules of man. Like Athena, if I remember correctly, she betrayed the old rules of blood, the laws of blood, and was more focused on upholding the rules of man. One of those myths about a guy killing his daughter. What was that one? That one? What a jerk that guy was. I was totally rooting for him to get screwed, but then, and the Furies wanted to get him. The Furies hated him for
Mm-hmm.
killing his daughter because that was breaking the rules of blood, but because his wife killed him or something along those lines, Athena ruled on his side. Jeez, I think I'm butchering this Greek myth. Does any of that sound
Yeah,
familiar to you?
vaguely. I mean, I'll be honest, my Greek mythology is not what it could be, and I'm playing a little fast and loose with this game. But I think what draws me to that character is this is a character that has tremendous power and at the same time is sort of reviled as this really hideous creature. And it's interesting to me to think about the ways that like appearance can be startling and powerful, and it can be a source of strength, but also a source of vulnerability. So in the game, you can petrify these little Greek hoplites that are like wandering around trying to get you, and then you can sort of push them around and use them as ledges to climb up to different levels. And so that's really powerful. Like they are essentially, they're almost no threat to you except a few. But at the same time, that strength is also a really tremendous weakness, because if you catch yourself in a mirror, you're like, that's a fail state. So I think that sort of duality uh, of the character is really interesting to me. And again, I'm sort of like messing around with the myth a bit, but yeah.
Well, you seem to at least know it, unlike me, who was just probably making up stuff again, like I did with the poor Holcomb guy. I still feel guilty about that. That's an exciting new mechanic, it sounds like, just to make the player feel both powerful and vulnerable to their own strength and their own potential for self-destruction, accidental self-destruction. And then even further, asking them to take the risk to close their eyes and try to navigate strictly from memory. That all sounds really exciting and fresh. That's pretty, hate to say it, but it's fairly rare when it comes to a game that's strictly about, it sounds like there's symbolism in there, but very much of it's about just the mechanics on a 2D plane, to be able to come up with something like that. How did you get that idea for this game?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've been fascinated by that character for a long time for the reasons I was talking about. The game started as a reskin of an old NES game called Solomon's Key.
Mm-hmm.
And in that game, you're sort of like creating blocks and using them to climb around the environment. It sort of started with that as like, well, what if instead of creating blocks, you're petrifying people and turning them into stones that you're climbing on. And so I took a lot from that game. Like, the stages are all single screen. It's very very minimalistic, like very kind of block-based design. But then I sort of moved on to be like, well, I want to focus more on like the Medusa part and less like, I don't really have anything invested in Solomon's Key as a game. I think it's kind of neat, but yeah, it sort of evolved from there. And I guess like I do feel kind of weird about making what is essentially a puzzle platformer, because I mean, there are some really interesting things that have been done in that genre, but there's a lot of not so interesting things too. And so I'm really trying to keep the focus less on look how clever I, the designer, am in setting up these elaborate puzzles, and more on just like, yeah, like you said, like putting the player in this role of feeling like powerful but also vulnerable. So focusing more on that emotional experience rather than sort of the really intense puzzle challenge.
Yeah, either way, I'm all about it. I'm very excited to play it. And did you do the graphics as well?
Yeah, I'm doing everything in the game. I'm bringing a friend on to do the music, so I'm excited to actually have music being developed for one of my games. I think that'll be really cool.
Absolutely, and I love, at least the last screenshot I saw, that you're doing low-res pixel art, but with a black outline around each pixel. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, there's like a blacklining effect. The tool that I'm using to develop it has like really simple filter effects, so it sort of feels like cheating, but I really like the way that it sort of sets everything apart and makes it much more distinct, and sort of like sets it apart from a lot of other kind of like low-res pixel art that I've seen too.
Absolutely, it reminded me a little bit of a hieroglyphics version of an NES game, which was really fitting for the ancient feel you were going for. So yeah, very exciting. When do you think that might be coming out?
Hopefully the end of November. I'm actually in the middle of moving right now, so a lot of things are up in the air, but yeah, I think it's getting close to being done, so ideally November.
Exciting. And I think I read properly that you're moving to Toronto. I feel like such a creeper knowing that, but is that right?
No, I mean, I'm fairly public about it. Yeah, I'm moving to Toronto in a couple of weeks.
That means one word, Grant. Money. Let's do it. That's what I was hoping for you. I talked to so many developers on the show from Toronto or from Canada who have been able to maintain their sense of purpose and sense of integrity and a sense of excitement at the possibilities for what they can do. in this field, which is so expensive or so time-consuming, or both, thanks to the grant money you can get from Toronto. So I hope you apply for some grants. I would love for you to get paid for all these things, because until now,
Great.
I don't know if you've released any commercial games as of yet, have you?
I haven't, no. Everything that I've released so far has sort of just been, I mean, it's all been online, and I haven't really charged anything for it. I have like a tip jar on my site, so some very generous people have contributed to that. But we'll see about Medusa, whether that ends up being something that is commercial or not. Because on the one hand, it's really important to me that my work be available and accessible to people. But on the other hand, you know, like you say, like, I mean, maintaining a sense of purpose is important, and so is eating. So it would be nice to be able to have some income. Yeah.
I'm getting a text message from Sinistar asking you to be louder. I've heard you perfectly, but maybe on the recording it's
Okay.
different.
Yeah, I can be a little louder.
Oh yeah, that sounds good.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
How are you liking being on the show so far? There's only one way you can answer that, I just realized, without ruining the rest of the show. Darn it.
Yeah.
Forget I asked that, Merritt Kopas, sorry.
Okay.
Let or you can answer it if you want to. If you have an idea to answer it, feel free.
I mean, yeah, no, it's been great so far. I really appreciate you having me on.
You're so nice, Merritt Kopas, I can tell. Do you swear ever? You don't seem like a swearer.
Am I allowed to swear on here?
Oh, sure, you can swear all you want.
Oh, really?
I rarely swear. Oh, yeah.
I've been under the
swear.
impression that I should keep that down. I swear somewhat frequently. Yeah.
I can't picture you swearing for some reason. You have
Okay,
this
well,
air about you. Yeah?
I was gonna say, you know, I'll take the lid off the jar for the rest of the show if you like.
Sure. You've got an air about you which speaks to a sort of intent to do right by people all the time. That's
Oh.
how you seem to me. I've been following you on Twitter for a little while, and I've been waiting for that time when you show any signs of wanting to destroy for destroying's sake, which is so common in humanity, right? We all have that side of us, I would imagine. I've never seen that in you. It's always somewhat insightful or caring, or maybe a little sad sometimes, as we all get.
Wow.
And people should follow you on Twitter if they want insights and fun. You're at M_Kopas on Twitter, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, just want to make sure I got that right.
I'm sure that I tweet really angry and destructive things. Maybe they're all like really late at night or something, and you just missed them.
Yeah, it could be. So who are some of the other people that you feel like people should be watching? We talked about Anna a little bit.
Yeah.
Are there other people who are making games that people should know about if they're interested in the kind of work you're doing?
Yeah, totally. So off the top of my head, there are a few people. Amy Dentata is someone who has made a few games in Unity, actually, which is like always really impressive to me as someone who's tried to grapple with that tool and just finds it really intimidating. I featured one of her games on Forest Ambassador recently called 10 Seconds in Hell, which is about domestic abuse and violence, and it's this really powerful, brief piece, and I think she's doing some really cool work. AVB is someone who has made Twine games in the past, and I think is interested in doing more development work. They're, I think, more well known as a critic and journalist right now, but their Twine game Rockin' Night Crusade and a few others are just totally amazing. And then, wow, I mean, yeah, there's just like, there's a lot of people doing things that are going under the radar. And part of what I'm trying to do with Forest Ambassador is to show that stuff. But I mean, sites like Twine Hub too, I think are a really good source for finding people who are, you know, maybe doing things and don't have quite the same visibility, but are doing work that's like really valuable and important. So I would suggest people like go check out Twine Hub and also sites like Free and New Games.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of trouble trying to get people to try Twine, though, because they have this sense that they want to see their world as opposed to read their world. Have you had that struggle to try to convince people to give Twine a try, because I'm very much hoping that it stops being as popular as it is now. Like, people who make Twine games play Twine games, but to get it to branch out a little bit. I've been trying to sell people by like making a Twine Animal Crossing game. I think a lot of people who play Animal Crossing would like Twine if they'd try it.
Yeah.
But because it's got a similar sort of rejection of a lot of sensibilities people associate with video games. But anyway, how has that been for you to introduce people to Twine and try to get them to give it a try?
Yeah, I think my approach has been to show people the range of things that are being done. So some people just aren't all that interested in traditional choose your own adventure games, and I mean, on some level, that's totally fine. But the things that people are doing with the tool go way beyond that. So I posted on my site, I think yesterday or a couple days ago, this list of just like 12 Twine games that do a huge range of things. So there's traditional choose your own adventure stuff, but then there's also stuff that could be classed more as like interactive poetry. There's stuff like Lydia Neon's Player 2, which is like essentially a tool or sort of an interactive experience for dealing with conflict with another person. And just like the huge range of things that are being done, and there are audiovisual things being done with the tool too. Anhedonia by Maddox Pratt, I think, is a really great example of something that includes visuals and audio. So maybe things like that are good ways of getting people interested in what's being done.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like when you make a game like Medusa that's very, at least on the surface, you can see that it's a traditional video game right off the bat? Do you get the sense that that's going to end up getting a lot more attention than something you might do that's more more text-based or more personal and poetic?
Yeah, that's something that I've thought about, because usually when I'm making games, like, I'm not really interested in making things that do look like traditional games, or if I do, I want to be conscious about how I'm doing that, because I want most of my things to be playable by people who don't have experience or background in games. So that's one thing I'm kind of worried about with Medusa, and I'm thinking about how to manage this. Is this looks like a video game, and people who don't have a background with games might be scared off by it, and they're who I want to be playing it. So how do I manage that and sort of reduce the intimidation factor? But then on the other hand, games like that maybe, yeah, are more likely to get covered or talked about by people who have that background. So I think there's this kind of like balance, because like I don't want to like dismiss everyone who is invested in or has background with traditional games, because a lot of really cool people do. But yeah, it's just working to try and find this balance of like, is this going to be accessible to a fairly wide range of people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's few developers I can think of who've managed to get the academic, the non-traditional power fantasy gamer audience, and then also that audience together under one roof. Sometimes I feel like Terry Kavanaugh's done it, and sometimes I'm not so sure. I want him to have done it because I'm such a big fan of his. And you're in so many ways in two different worlds. You've come from this academic world, and you're also in this. You're stepping your toes into this video game culture, which is such a different thing. How has that experience been for you? What do you feel are the similarities and the differences between the world you might have come from, being a smart person with a master's degree, and then also kind of getting in touch with people that are still so focused on Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty or what have you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one thing is, when you're immersed in academic spaces, or really any space for a long amount of time, you come to take certain things for granted, and you come to take certain sort of baseline assumptions for granted. And moving into games, a lot of those assumptions that I have about how people have conversations, or about like, what what's an acceptable way of like speaking with someone or making an argument. Those aren't always in place. But at the same time, the games environments that I found myself in are like pretty welcoming. And yeah, there is this really toxic mainstream culture that exists, but I think insofar as I've been able to avoid that, I've found a community of people who are extremely generous with their time and money sometimes, um, willing to to impart skills and knowledge, and just there's this tremendous sense of like sharing and of knowledge building and um, like of non-competition really. And I think part of that is maybe because a lot of us aren't really um, in any danger of making a lot of money anytime soon. So there isn't really a lot to fight over. And you know, it's not like academia or the academia that I've had experiences with where there is this publish or perish culture where people are tremendously invested in doing something first, or in sort of hoarding their knowledge away in journals that very few people have access to. So there is this big, really powerful sense of openness, and that's something that I've come to really value.
Absolutely. It's sounding like where academia and game development cross over, there's like this sliver in between where things can be really good, where you get the best of both worlds without quite as much of the problems that can come from both. I'm hoping we can keep that sliver from getting too much in the way of, like you said, competitiveness and also classism. I always fear is going to leak its way into that, because right now, if I go to, I was at the no-show event in Boston this past weekend, not for as long as I would have liked to. I missed Anna's speech, unfortunately. I was like 5 minutes too late. But there was just a sense that everybody was going to accept whatever ideas came through, and there was a baseline understanding that no destructive behavior or destructive attitudes was going to be tolerated. And this is just a few weeks after coming back from PAX, where the hundred thousands of people are there, and the guys running the show are still sticking with so many of the toxic attitudes that they've sadly gotten rich off of. When I think about the guys that run PAX, I feel like a weird mix of sadness and grossed out. Wonder if I'll ever be invited to PAX again after now. I've said that. I've gotten in fights with them too. Rats. Why don't I think before I eat? But yeah, it's such a different to go to PAX and then go to the no show, which was also part of the Boston Festival of Indie Games. They were kind of coinciding. Was such a different world, and I'm waiting for PAX to be more like no show, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Have you thought much about how you're hoping things progress when it comes to that kind of culture? Like, are you hoping that PAX changes to become more like the spaces where you've found collaboration to be fruitful with other video game developers, or is that just completely out of the question that they would ever start to be more like that?
Yeah, I mean, wow. I feel like, yeah, I mean, so I'm in Seattle right now, so I was having a lot of these conversations a few weeks ago when PAX was here, and I don't know. I mean, personally, I am not invested in that space, and I think there is the possibility that people can work to make it better. But for me, it's just not something that I'm interested in participating in, and that sort of it goes beyond the immediate, obvious grossness and just like terrible beliefs of its organizers and of a lot of the people there. I mean, PAX is like a mainstream consumer game show, and a lot of what happens there is just really gross to me, even beyond like the stuff, like the really obvious sexism and homophobia and racism. Just being on the show floor is like this. it's like capitalism is just kind of bombarding you. And a lot of people there are doing really great work, and like I'm really impressed. But like, it's like this is video games. Video games are this massive, huge industry, and I'm not really interested in gaining access to that so much as I am interested in building an alternative, and sort of chipping away at it at the same time. So, I mean, I think things like no-show are tremendously important, and I've been talking with some people about like how can we have conferences and events like that, that are maybe more locally focused, that don't have high fees, that are open and accessible, where like actual really interesting, compelling stuff happens. Like I was at JDC this year for my first time, and there was this unconference called Lost Levels that Robert Yang and a few other people put on. And I think a lot of people who were there agreed that like the most important stuff at GDC happened there. And it was this free thing that happened in the park that anyone could sign up to speak at. And it was this amazing event. And just thinking about how we can harness or expand those kinds of models rather than focus on this kind of PAX model of like this huge capitalistic convention.
Right. I wasn't at the first PAX, but I was always told that it started off as a real, like, we just love this comic strip that nobody's really heard of, and we're all friends, and it had this community vibe and now it's grown into this gigantic thing because, at least my understanding of the way people try to sell things to other people is they want to trick the potential consumer into thinking, oh, this is something really genuine and true, and if you buy this, you're going to be a part of something that's real, that's not just being manufactured to get me. This is This is made of the people for the people, and that's kind of what PAX still tries to put out. But we're actually there, and there's $6 cheeseburgers, and everyone's trying to get you to buy their merchandise, and everything's 3 times expensive. It's clear what the real motivation is there. But I want you to be rich, so this is where I come into conflict. When you're like, I want to continue to do smaller things that are about connecting with other people, about enriching your creativity, about learning new techniques, like how the no-show was. But when I was looking around at no-show, I was like, I wish you guys were at PAX getting rich and being a big name. And the closest I saw to anyone along those lines is I did see Christine Love at PAX briefly, and she looked fantastic. But I could tell that it was not easy for her to be there, and I hope it was worth it. I think her work's really important and really exciting, and people get exposed to it. But the other side of it is she had to be in that environment, which is not easy. So do you imagine if Medusa does go commercial, and then you're like, well, I could go to PAX with Christine and sell it. Would that be something you would want to do? Or what it's something to have to think about.
I guess this isn't even necessarily like a political statement on my part. Like I'm boycotting PAX. It's just like I don't think I would want to be there. Like I'm just I'm not. I just don't want to put myself through that. And I think all indie devs, people make their own decisions, and people need to make money, and like I recognize that there are good reasons to go there and do that, and so there's like zero judgment on my part, but I just don't think I could do it. I'm just not sure that would work for me, and and I don't want to be rich. Like that's not. Like I appreciate that you want me to, but that's not my goal, right? Like I want to get by, and like I recognize that I have to participate in capitalism to do that, but I just want to burn that shit down. Like I don't want to like come out on top. Yeah, I'm gonna start swearing now if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely, I enjoy it. So your goal is not to be rich, and I think anyone who's followed your career thus far would see that because you haven't sold any of your games yet, and you could have. In my opinion, you could have. What is more of your goal in terms of what you'd like to be doing years from now that's different from where you're at today? It's clear what you're doing now, but how would you like things to be different for you in a few years in terms of where you've grown to?
Yeah. So I will say that while I'm leaving academia, I would really like to continue teaching. It's something that I really enjoy doing. I think I'm pretty good at, and it's important to me to like use those skills and to teach, especially in environments that aren't the sort of typical four-year university setting. So right now, like I'm looking into teaching at community colleges. But one project that I've thought about doing for a long time now is doing sort of like a workshop series or a course or something with youth where I talked about this before of making games and sort of learning about social systems and sort of making games as a way of learning things and expressing things about our lives. So this is something that like I'm not really sure of the logistics of, but if I were doing this in a few years from now, I would be tremendously happy. I think it would be really hard because like it's hard enough doing something like a writing workshop, but to do a games workshop, people have to learn to manage all these different skills. But I think the potential for making games that are expressive and that in making them we learn something about the world we're living in, I think the potential is really, really great there. So I guess I see myself doing the same kinds of things that I'm doing right now in terms of games, but I'd also like to incorporate my pedagogy and like my interest in teaching into that as well.
Pedagogy?
Pedagogy.
That sounded like a smart new word I'd never heard. Is that a real word, pedagogy?
Yeah, pedagogy is just like learning philosophy or like teaching philosophy. Yeah.
Whoa. Thank you for teaching me a new word. Do you know Erin Robinson?
I don't.
I should probably introduce you. She taught, she was paid to teach both children and then later adults in Europe for kind of a short-term basis, just a semester. A lot of the things that you're talking about, and had a really rewarding experience of it. So I'd love to connect you to and maybe talk about that. She's a very smart person. Her new game, Gravity Ghost, is coming up pretty soon. She's pretty excited about it, as am I. Yeah, that's fun. So what do you think it is about video games and the internet that, in terms of creating a space where you can feel safe to take all these kinds of risks? Because, like I was saying before, you take what seems to me to be pretty large risks with your time, your energy, and also your emotional state. And it's not the kind of thing that I can imagine happening without the technology we have now. But is there something to it that it has on you? Have you always been the kind of person that takes these kinds of risks? Like, would you write amazing poetry and just like blanket it around the wall somewhere and hope people read it and be like, sorry if you hate it? Or is it, did the internet bring that out in you in some way?
Oh, yeah. I think the internet has been a big part of it for me, and especially Twitter. I was a very different person pre-Twitter, and to be fair, I was a very different person a few years ago for a lot of reasons, but just finding Twitter and sort of stumbling into a bunch of communities of people who were very open, very friendly, very compassionate was a really, really important thing for me in sort of allowing me to feel like it was okay to express things that I was feeling. And I guess since then, yeah, like I've just become a very open person online, and I guess I've gotten to the point where it doesn't feel like I'm being vulnerable. Maybe just because like I'm doing it so much, but part of that is like I feel like when, and this isn't a strategy that I would advocate for everyone, but in being really open, I feel like I am actually like preempting ways for people to hurt me, because if I don't have a lot of secrets, then there's nothing for people to dig up. If I'm already open about my feelings, then there's nothing for people to pry into. So, I mean, in part, maybe it's been kind of a defense mechanism, but also it has been just this really cool experience of finding groups of people on Twitter who I felt safe and comfortable just sort of being open around.
Mhm.
But the poetry,
Yeah,
I
it's
feel like I
been
should do that.
well, that would be kind of the next step to have to take the things we feel safe doing virtually. Like when I'm on Twitter, I often remember how much I used to love Zork and how this isn't that different for me. I'm typing in commands. I'm getting responses from sometimes 30, 40 people. If I go on Twitter right now and write, man, that GTA 5's for losers, I know I'm going to get 100 people yelling at me, and then I can just feel like I just pressed the yell at me button and laugh about it. But it's very different when you go into a crowd and say those things to people totally. Do you have any feelings about Grand Theft Auto 5, actually, now that we're talking about it? You've said a few times that you don't have much investment in the mainstream space, but everyone's talking about it. Why not ask Merritt Kopas if I ever on the show? I feel like a wasted opportunity.
Right? Basically, I don't think I have anything to say about GTA 5 that hasn't been said by Lee Alexander in her 2 reviews of the game. She wrote an actual serious analysis of the game that is basically just said that it's not really that funny and it's kind of dark, but it's mostly just sad. And then she also did an audio review of it, which just had me like on the floor. If you haven't listened to it already, then you definitely should. It's just the funniest thing, and I think it's such like a biting assessment of the game. And
what I loved about it was I didn't mean to cut you off.
Please go ahead.
What I loved about her assessment is from the assessment she made before she even played it is, as a video game writer, someone in the video game press, you feel as though there's this built-in culture around GTA that you have to join in on, or else everyone's going to hate you. Like if I write an article on Destructoid tomorrow about why I don't like GTA, I guarantee you I'm going to lose Twitter followers, I'm going to get death threats, blah, blah, blah. But she just bravely called it exactly as people she showed satirically, which is ironic, how people view GTA, that it is smart because it has bad radio shows that are bad, and there's 3 jerks instead of 1 now, so 3 jerks for the price of 1. It was she's actually, I think she's going to be on the show next week talking about all that stuff, which will be fun. Yeah. She actually years ago worked for Destructoid, and one of the things I first read by her was GTA fan fiction, which I never thought. Yeah, so sure, her history with that series is long, and she used to really enjoy it, but it's sounding like she's kind of changed her place. So, yeah, I did notice you liked Saints Row a little bit, though.
Yeah. So I forget who said it. Someone tweeted this, but it was GTA is a game that doesn't care about anything, but desperately wants you to think that it does. And Saints Row is a game that really just deeply cares, but is sort of putting up this facade of like, no, not really though, we're just joking. And I think that's like such an apt comparison. Saints Row for me is like, I mean, I think there are like genuinely powerful emotional moments in Saints Row 4, and also like it functions so much better as a satire of mainstream games than something like Grand Theft Auto does. Things like the sex scenes are just such like a perfect satire of Mass Effect to me, because in Mass Effect you follow this like conversation chain with a character and like throughout the game, and you're like picking all the right options, all the right things to say to them, and eventually at the climax of the game, you get to have sex with them, and it's like this big dramatic moment, and like there's like these like, it fades to black and these like tasteful like montages and this dramatic music. And in Saints Row 4, you at any time can go up to any one of your crew and like ask them if they want to fuck. And like what happens is like it's like a like a 1 minute scene, and like it's funny, and like the range of things is like much bigger, and like it decentralizes this like romance narrative of like, well, you court and then you have sex and then like that's the climax and like that's the big thing. It's just like Saints Row is a game about friends, and it isn't interested in sort of like the bullshit romance narratives that games like Mass Effect perpetuate. So yeah, I like Saints Row a lot.
What an interesting way of looking at it. I never thought of it that way. I don't know if you've played the dating scenes in Killer is Dead at all, or heard of them. I wonder what you'll think. I'd be very curious to hear. For me, it is the most biting attack. And it's an unintentional attack on heterosexual dating techniques. And it's like so sadly true for a lot of people. So I thought it was funny. But the intention is actually probably much stupider than that. I find Suda 51's games are accidentally brilliant. When they're brilliant, I've met him a few times. Very nice guy. He doesn't think this stuff through. He just writes, and then he's masturbating with a lightsaber. Why'd that happen, Suda? I don't know. What's the next thing? He doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah. I love him though. We have some questions from people watching.
Oh, cool.
R. Xanadu, who is a frequent viewer of the show, thank you for watching again, says, I'm downright afraid to talk online due to the negativity most people online show when talking online. Just posting these messages in a chat is a tad frightening. What do you do in order to keep a level head while talking online? That is a great question. You talked a little bit about the strength of the block button and kind of being selective in what you discuss, but the internet is a place where people seem to feel completely unhinged and unbridled by any sort of rules of common etiquette and humanity a lot of the time. So you do put yourself in a vulnerable place, especially doing a live stream. Thank you again for doing that. It's not easy walking on with a stranger and talking for an hour and a half. So is there something you do in order to make sure you don't get triggered into feeling frightened or angry at people online and have that kind of ravel in the way that it so often does for people?
Yeah, I guess there are a few things. And some of them I've already mentioned, like by being conscious about the things that or the conversations I participate in, although that's mostly just because I have very little interest in participating in conversations around a lot of mainstream games. By being aware that not engaging is always an option, and that no one has the right to demand your time or your attention. And I think especially like dudes online often feel like women owe them a response, even outside of the context of like a dating website or something. Just if someone, if a dude tweets at a woman on Twitter, like I think he often feels like he has like she has an obligation to respond, and that's absolutely untrue. You never need to feel like you're obligated to respond to anyone. You can always ignore them. You can always block them. And that's a really hard thing to learn that you don't owe people anything. But I think that is like the most important thing, to just work towards that kind of recognition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Something I've tried to teach myself, and I've said this so many times over the years, it's going to sound boring, but I never get sick of saying it, and that's when Skeletor hates you, that means you're being a good He-Man. Does that make sense? Like when somebody is so mean to me out of nowhere on Twitter over something so benign, I have to remind myself, anyone who would let all of that out of me for no reason is probably the bad guy in this particular part of my life for whatever reason. I'm just, just wipe them out by not engaging in it and not getting in that struggle. G.R. Martin asks, what was your motivation in creating Lim? And that makes me realize that I was so caught up in all the other conversations. We barely talked about all the other games you've made. You've made so many video games. Should we try to run through them? Do you want to talk about Lim first, or do you want to talk about something else off the top of your head?
Yeah, maybe let's talk about something else, and then we can talk about Lim a little bit, because I've talked more about Lim in other places, so it'd be nice to talk about some other stuff.
Lim did get a lot of publicity, which I thought was great, but I always tell people about hug punks, and someone on the Destructoid.com comments, Long John, I believe it was just like, yeah, dude, creator of hug punks is on, awesome, you gotta watch it. It's a game that if more people played it, I think they would. Out of all of your games, that's the one that just instantly punched me in the heart with like a huge smile on my face, and it remained there throughout. So thank you for that. Let's talk about Hug Pump since I've already started. What got you making that game, and what is it all about?
Okay, so yeah, Hug Punks is really inspired by Zach Isles' game, who you may know from this game he's working on right now called Lioness. And so he made this game called Punk's Not Dead, and I actually really like Punk's Not Dead. Like, I think it's a really cool game. You basically just sort of like walk around on the screen punching dudes and trying not to get shot. And, you know, maybe that in itself isn't like, you know, punching dudes is a pretty well-established verb in the language of video games. But the aesthetics of the game were just really beautiful. And so I was like, well, this is really cool. Like, I love like sort of the pink on black. I love the way that messages sort of pop up when you hit someone. But like, what would this look like if it were not about punching people? And you know, there's like some argument to be made, and like I think Zach has said that the game is intended as a parody. And so like Hug Punks wasn't made with like any ill will towards him, like definitely not. But it was just like, what if you just changed the verb in this game? Like, what would it look like? And so I had to like make a few changes to it as a result, because like I didn't want to just be hugging random strangers, because there's sort of some weird physical boundary violations there. So I wanted to make it clear that you're hugging people who are waving to you and like sort of like they're your friends, and you know they consent to hugging you. And I wanted to incorporate, like in the original, there's an environment destruction mechanic where you hit dudes and they smash into lampposts and things. And so I wanted to incorporate changing the environment as well. So when you hug people, the flowers grow, and you know, animals appear, and the environment just sort of changes and grows rather than being destroyed.
Yeah, it's freaking adorable. It is the game that I send to people when I want to show them that, like, I have a friend who's just getting into programming, and she's always thought that video games aren't for her. She used to play Sonic the Hedgehog with her sister, and she always made her be Tails, and she's like, this sucks, being Tails sucks, video games equal disempowerment, I never want to play them again. But she's just gotten into programming and made her first game, and I immediately sent her Hug Punks. I'm like, you could make something that makes other people feel like this. And she was like, oh, wow, things can just be cute and nice and nobody died. This is amazing. They don't know it. So many people don't know.
Yeah.
So on her behalf and on my behalf, thank you for making that video game. That was one of your more visually focused games. Octopi is another one that's more visually focused, which I have a hard time with that game.
It's kind of weird.
I'm bad at it.
Yeah. That was a sort of like a little experiment. One thing that I'm interested in doing that I haven't done as much of, because there are just certain special difficulties with it, is doing two-player games. So that was an attempt to create a two-player game where the controls were sort of split between two players, and it's sort of asymmetric. I don't know if it was like entirely successful, but I am really interested in that idea of like local two-player games. And two-player games where the things that the players are doing aren't identical, or they don't have the same capabilities. I think there's a lot of really interesting ground there. And as mainstream games have moved away from like the same room multiplayer experiences, I think there's a lot of room there for smaller developers to play around with.
Absolutely, I'm excited to see where that goes. I don't know if you ever played Friendship in Four Colors by Damien Sommer.
No, I've heard of it, but
It's really fast. You can get through it really quickly, but it is two-player, and it's a little bit like Medusa in my mind anyway. Not having played Medusa, so no, but you can't help but accidentally hurt your friend, and you both have to survive. So you'll get a power-up that every time you jump, you use it no matter what, and it shoots a laser that will kill your friend. So you have to time when you jump to make sure they don't die behind you, and it goes on and on like that. It's very clever game, and I think Damien's in Toronto. You might end up meeting him. He's a wonderful person. Yeah, I think you'd get along with him well. Oh, you've seen some of his other games?
Yeah, he actually made a local multiplayer game in Twine, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's about rats, and like each player plays it on a separate device, and it sort of relies on you sort of like telling other players what you've done, like what actions you've taken, and then them inputting that in their game, and like it supports like 8 people, I think. I haven't actually gotten to play it, but it seems like really cool, and that's the kind of thing that I'm really interested in.
Huh, yeah, I look forward to checking it out. Then you've also done more text-based games. The one that's the title immediately comes to mind is Conversations with My Mother. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
I couldn't believe, and then the way it ends, each session of the game, I can't believe that. That's what I was thinking of when I was saying the amount that you put yourself out for people to get to know and to embrace or to not understand or to whatever may happen. You put yourself out there. Now, it's Twine, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's made in Twine. Yeah.
It's a Twine game where, depending on how the conversation goes, it ends with a tweet by Merritt Kopas, a real-life tweet about talking to your mother. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, that's like the basic flow of the game. And when I was working on that, it was really important to me that the game not be from my perspective. So I didn't want to put the player in my role because my concern was that what would happen is they would come away with like, wow, Merritt's mom is like kind of mean or doesn't like get her at all. I wanted to put the player in her role. So like the player is my mother when they play that game, which is kind of weird, but and just see how like small decisions in everyday conversations can have real impacts. And so yeah, I wanted to use those tweets of like, I think they're from like the past year of just like after I'd had actual conversations on the phone with my mom of like small word choices just like making such a big difference, and just what the consequences of those are.
Absolutely. Did your mom ever play it, do you know?
I don't know if my mom played it. I didn't like go out of my way to tell her about it. I probably will soon. For all I know, she could be watching this, although I really doubt it.
I don't think my mom's watching either. She would never watch this. Such a amazing way to, and one of the things I love about your games is that you seem to really be conscious of the player's time, and you cut out all the fat somehow. You just directly pack a punch with every little thing. If you're more verbose, you make sure that there's a lot of evocative words in there. But if Conversations with My Mother, it's very simple, and you feel invited right into it. You feel like you're in that place, and then all of a sudden you're hit with such a immensely real and emotionally powerful, I don't want to call it punchline, but well, yeah, maybe not funny punchline, but a punch in the face or a slap in the face, a slap line maybe. I don't know, something along those lines. And it's all the more poignant because it's real. And I feel like if more people played that game in a lot of your games, they would see how real video games can be used. The sense of not pretending to do something, but actually stepping in somebody else's shoes. I'm going on a tangent, but that's something I really desperately hope people start using video games for, instead of just escaping, because we have all these opportunities to get to know each other instead of running away from intimacy with other human beings, can use video games as a tool for it. And it's such a powerful, genuine tool, I guess. More so than like OkCupid, which just leaves you feeling like you just saw a bunch of pickup lines and that was it. It's a depressing place to be. Did you want to talk about Limb a little bit?
Sure.
If people are curious about it?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or were there other games you wanted to talk about first? I didn't mean to jump right to it.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about Limb for a little bit, and then if there's other things, other games in particular you'd like to discuss.
Well, we only have 5 darn minutes left.
Oh,
the show
geez.
got cut a little short because of the technical problems. But yeah, we'll start with Limb, and then we'll get to one more question at least, and then see what happens after that. It's okay.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just keep things super quick with Limb. That game came from 2 places. One was, this was like the first summer that I was moving through the world as a woman, and like I would walk into a room and be totally unsure of how people were going to perceive me. And there's just this feeling of like, maybe not powerlessness, but of self-doubt and like of wondering like, what is it in particular that people are picking up on? Like, what are they using to make these decisions about gender? And at the same time, I was playing this game Prototype, which is just like this, it's like a bro power fantasy. You're running around and punching people and throwing cars around. But the really interesting thing to me about that game is the character isn't really human, but is trying to blend in as one. And if he ever, or if it ever really reveals itself, it attracts a lot of negative attention. And so like that element of stealth gameplay was interesting to me. And so I tried to combine those things and think about, okay, well, what would a game about trying to blend in and sort of like remain unnoticed look like if it weren't primarily about power, but about just like getting through your day? So that's really where Limb came from. I was trying to impart that feeling of uncertainty and of self-doubt and questioning, like, well, why did I blend in that time? Why did I not this time? And so those 2 things sort of came together for that. And I admit that Prototype is sort of like a weird inspiration for like a game like Limb, but I mean, I think I was at a place where I was just looking for things that looked like myself wherever I could find them, and that included some sort of far afield places.
Interesting. You were able to see yourself in Prototype. That's not something a lot of people would say. I think they'd like to feel like they're that tough, but to look at the vulnerability of that game and to extrapolate from it's a wonderful thing to do.
And I think that's not necessarily something that the developers were pushing, but it was a reading that I maybe put onto the game, but it was still useful to me. So
absolutely. I find that the more people I talk to in the AAA world, or at least whatever Prototype was, ambitiously hoping to be AAA someday, they're so locked and they're desperate to be able to say something with their lives. I mean, they don't want to just be a small wheel in a big wheel set saying nothing. So they try to inject little things in there, but it almost always gets squashed by the shareholders and the people running the show. So maybe you found a little bit of feeling in Prototype that maybe was intended. I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
Probably not. No.
Maybe.
Yeah. Why not hope for the best? Miss Chad asks, do you feel there's a gap between academia and practice, in this case game design, perhaps in terms of knowledge generated within academia being passed on to or discussed within practice among designers? Holy smoke, I don't understand that question. It sounds smart, but I don't get it at all. Maybe I should read it again? A gap between academia and practice. Maybe he means all of the things people are studying, thinking, philosophizing, theorizing, and putting it into practice in a game design. Have you ever, I'll just turn it into a question I can ask, do you ever feel like the depth of your thoughts and the complexities and the intensity of the emotions you're feeling and the tools you have at your disposal with design, do you feel like there's ever been a mismatch there where it can be frustrating that you can't kind of sum up everything you're going through video games?
So to answer that question, I think it's hard for me because I'm kind of grappling with the tools that I have, and it's not necessarily a problem with the tools, but just I don't have the experience that I need always to get something across, and so that's something I'm always working at. And then I think the original question was asking about like where knowledge is generated and like if it's primarily coming from academic spaces into like spheres of practice. And like to some extent that division is artificial, but I will say that I don't really know a lot about academic game design because that's not my background. And it seems to me that a lot of knowledge about games is being generated outside of those spaces. It's being generated outside of academic spaces. And I think that's true of really any field. A lot of work gets done by people who aren't in academia, and then that sort of gets picked up and talked about by academics. And sometimes that happens in scrupulous ways, and sometimes it happens in not so scrupulous ways. But yeah, I see a lot of that work being done by people who don't maybe have college degrees, who aren't in those spaces, but nonetheless are generating really impressive and important knowledge that I think probably will start to get picked up by academics doing research on game design.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It was really interesting. You said earlier that with Medusa, in a way, you were hoping to skip the whole already acquainted with video games audience and maybe go for a larger audience that you might be missing out on because it looks like a video game. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited by the fact that you are shooting for everybody, not just because it can feel like the people who play video games, there's millions of them, so it feels like that's everybody. But there's hundreds of millions, billions of people outside of that, mm-hmm. Much larger world. Everyone talking about Grand Theft Auto 5 on Twitter, but if I go out on the street and ask your average person, how do you like Grand Theft Auto 5, they're going to look at me like I have two heads. So going out on the street, being able to share what you're doing with them, with everybody, is something I'm so happy that you're doing. And I do hope everybody checks out things that you do. We are a little bit out of time. We're mostly out of time. But because we got cut off and just because I'm being selfish, I wanted to make sure if there's anything you want to talk about that we missed. Is there anything you wanted to say or anything you wanted to bring up?
Wow. Yeah, I guess one thing I want to talk about a tiny bit is, and we sort of mentioned this, but I think one thing that is starting to get talked about a little more, but up until recently has been mostly off people's radar, is class when it comes to indie game development. Like, people assume sometimes that people like Anna are well off because they have like X amount of Twitter followers or have released X amount of really popular games, but that's usually not the case at all. And we definitely need to talk about, well, if we value the work that people are doing, then we need to find a way to support them. We can't just rely on people to sort of find their own way. And like I think there is this line in a lot of games communities of like, oh wow, this work is so innovative and so valuable and important to get outsiders making games, but people need to eat and people need to pay rent. And if you want people to keep making interesting and unconventional games, then we need to have that conversation about class, and we need to talk about how people are going to pay the bills. Mm-hmm. And I think Anna's talk at No Show was mainly about class, and so hopefully if people didn't get to go to that, then they'll read that on her website, or I think they filmed all the talks as well. So I hope that's something that that we continue to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something I'm intimately acquainted with because I don't make games, but I talk to people who make them all the time, and there is a budding classism where the people who've made more money only take the advice from other people who've made a lot of money, and will, like you said, assume that because you're a name that you're financially well off and you don't need the support of the consumer, but they just, it's very easy to be internet famous these days, unfortunately. Right. Well, take that back. It's not easy but it's not like in the old days of television where everyone who was on TV was also getting a paycheck and their fame was balanced with financial success. I will post that talk by Anna. I will find it on the internet and put it on Monday. Put it on Destructoid then. Sundays, sadly, people don't come to the site as much on Sundays. But the rerun for this will be on Wednesday, too.
Great.
So that'll be good. People will hear you talk. Kickstarter, would you ever do it for money?
Oh, wow. There are so many issues with like that kind of crowdfunding. I would need to have a really good project, and even then, like, there's just so many things that can go wrong. I'm not sure that I'd be able to like muster the support that I needed. And I mean, I think there's this dynamic that we also don't talk about much, where some people are raised to believe that they're entitled to certain things, whereas others are constantly encouraged to believe that they deserve nothing, and that anything they get is a gift. And like when we think about like women, people of color, queers, poor folks, like we're taught that we don't deserve things, and so it's a lot harder for people in those positions to do something like ask for a lot of money to make a game, whereas other folks, they may not even think like about starting a Kickstarter. So that's something that I think I and a lot of other people have to work against too.
Absolutely. Yeah, the whole concept of what you're inherently entitled to and what the rules of society, the game rules have told you, from day one, you don't get to win necessarily. Terrible thing. Geez, that's not a very positive note to end on. I want to end on a positive note. I will end on a positive note by saying, Merritt Kopas, has been such a pleasure. I can't even tell you. Thank you for being on the show and letting me hopefully slowly warm you up to talking into a camera and telling people all about your process and your thoughts and your ideas. It's been really beyond just interesting. It's been good to have you on. I really do appreciate it. People can check you out. You have a website where you update it fairly regularly. I can't remember it. It's got an M in it.
Yeah, it's mkopas.net.
That is way easier to remember than it
Yeah.
should have been, considering I forgot it. And Forest Ambassador, which you update about 3 times a week, is that right?
3 times a week, yeah.
And that's just forestambassador.com.
.com.
And on Twitter, you are m_Kopas, Kopas.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I'd love to have you on
Having
at
me.
some point.
It's been great.
My pleasure. Yeah. I'm not impressed. I did a terrible job this week. I'm so sad. You can also, but if you didn't think I did a terrible job and you want to see other episodes on Detoid TV and also on Destructoid on YouTube, there's a variety of reruns. Just go to YouTube and look up Sub Holmes. You'll see, geez, almost 80 episodes now, I think. But also on iTunes, all the episodes have been converted to Podtoid. I mean, that's something I shouldn't talk about. Podtoid is this terrible podcast we do on Destructoid where Jim Sterling talks about wanting to have sex with me for an hour and a half every week. And people never get sick of it. Merritt Kopas, you wouldn't believe the amount of... I have become a sex symbol to Slovenian teenage boys, and I have no idea why. It's because of Jim Sterling. Anyway, Sub Holmes is also a podcast with minimal sexual harassment of me on the show, unlike Podtoid. So you can listen to Sub Holmes reruns there on iTunes. And I think that's it for me. Any last words, Merritt?
No, thanks for having me. It's been fantastic.
My pleasure, Merritt. Thank you. Okay, wave goodbye to the people. Bye.
Bye.